Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. Now, I'm going to take a segue. It's been one of those weeks where I've actually been dealing a lot with people on the issue of conflict, especially in intimate relationships. And at the moment, I'm not doing a lot of work. Well, I'm actually not doing any work with couples at the present time. I felt I needed to have a bit of a sabbatical from that for a while and focus on my work with men. But even in my therapeutic work and coaching work with men, one of the things that often stands out for me is the misunderstanding about how to really effectively deal with conflict. And some people believe that conflict is just down and out bad, that, a relationship shouldn't have any conflict. That's not healthy. Any relationship, good, bad, indifferent, healthy relationships will have some conflict in it. The question is not so much about the conflict, but it's about how we deal with that conflict. So in the previous episode, I talked a bit about attachment. I just dropped it in a little bit. I'm going to pick up on that later because it's fundamentally important to the process of how we deal with conflict in a relationship, and what do I need to take ownership for and what does the other person need to take ownership for. But in this episode, I'm going to make it fairly straightforward in that I'm going to give you an outline of how I, in essence, educate my clients about having a decent, fair fight in their relationship. Okay, now I know it sounds a bit off, fighting fair or fair fighting, but I think it's actually a really important way, a really good way in which we can conceptualise what a conflict might be really about. And the key word here in the title is about fair. And so essentially what's fair? Well, let me get to that. The one way we can establish fairness is firstly by being really, really succinct about what our key values in the relationship are. Now, I often ask my clients about what they are, and I get some very vague and diffused responses. In some instances, I get very clear responses. For instance, loyalty is one that often comes up relatively frequently. Now, I've spoken about these before in the context of parenting, but I'm going to bring it into the context of being in an intimate relationship with a partner. And so for me, as in parenting, the key values that I come back to are about love, respect, and cooperation. Now, the interesting thing is that in a lot of relationships, we try to communicate to our partner what our needs are in respect to that. Okay, but one of the things that I found after many years and several decades of working with both individuals and couples, the tendency for us is to communicate often in abstract terms. We make the assumption that whatever I'm saying, my partner is going to immediately understand and relate to the way that I relate to it. The problem with that is that that's just not true. Communication goes through layers. We've talked about cognitive biases, but imagine different filters or different glasses with different shades in front of them. That's the process in communication. Just because I have a particular idea behind what I mean love to be doesn't mean that my partner understands it exactly the same way that I do. In fact, there was a really interesting self-help book on love languages. Now, some of it's somewhat simplistic, but there's a really good message in that, and that is that we have different languages. We use words differently from person to person, and in order to formulate a good understanding and to enhance intimacy, it's really important to be able to somehow translate what we're saying to each other in a way that's meaningful. So one of the ways to do that is to go from the abstract to the more concrete. In other words, being able to use data in my conversation, in my conflict with my partner. So the question now is, okay, so here we have 3 substantial values: love, respect, and cooperation. We can't just agree on that, because we need between each other to explore, and please do this not in a heated moment, but rather when everything's relatively cool, calm and collected, is for each of us to define what those 3 values mean and what do they look like in action. So what is a loving thing? As myself, what do I understand loving behaviour to be? What's respect about? How does that look and feel in action? And similarly with cooperation, that one, a lot of people will go, well, that's fairly obvious. We work together, and in the practical sense, that might be really true. But the other part of it is that there's many, many different ways in which we can cooperate, and how we understand that cooperation to appear within the context of our relationship. Now, having said that, the next part that is absolutely crucial is that each person accepts responsibility for their part in the conflict. Okay, so you need to own your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and you need to be able to convey them to your partner in a way that the other person can appreciate them, understand them, all right? Now, one of the things that I immediately point out around this a lot of the times is don't try to argue your partner out of how they feel. It apart from anything else, it's likely to make them very defensive. And so once that happens, it's much, much more complicated, much, much more difficult to resolve the actual issue in the conflict. Okay, so the way that I suggest we do that is to, the moment my partner says, this is how I'm feeling, is you acknowledge and validate that. Yeah. So really important, it's a leveler. It gets us a bit more connected, we're less defensive. And then particularly, and this is relevant for most of us as men, don't immediately jump into problem solving, but stay with the process, stay with the clarification, go from the abstract to the concrete to the data. So a good data question in this context is to say to my partner, so what do you need from me around this, how you feel, or what the issue is? Now, don't be put off if you get well, I've told you that. Be patient. Ask for clarification again. Yes, I understand that you might have told me that. You might have told me that a number of times, but right here and now, what I need from you is to explain to me exactly in concrete terms what it is that you need. Now, my experience is that some, especially women, will probably need to think about that a bit more, because again, we have certain differences in expressions and in trying to convey, different meanings behind our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. My experience in most relationships, in most intimate relationships, is that fundamentally most of us have good intention. So our actions aren't necessarily deliberately hurtful. Now, that is most of the time. There are relationships where one partner has a particular way of dealing with the world wherein they may be emotionally abusive. Okay, now that's a different story altogether, and I'll probably do another podcast on that topic, all of itself. Okay, so the next step, and this is again where we come back to you need to take ownership for your thoughts, feelings, and actions, is to reflect on 4 elements in your communication within the relationship. And these came from a couple called the Gottmans, and they established a research and therapy foundation called the Gottman Institute, funnily enough. And they're all about enhancing relationships, marriage. And I discovered them very, very early on in the piece working with couples, and I just felt that the way that they approached, relationships, their research in relationships really resonated with me. And the section that I'm about to talk about is called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse in Relationships. Okay, so what are they? The first one, fundamentally, that they talk about is persistent criticism. So we have a tendency to, criticize what our partner's doing on an ongoing basis. So, imagine yourself in your partner's shoes and go, okay, what is she hearing from me? Is it really always criticism? Now, I certainly get that from teenagers a lot, where they feel that the only thing they hear from their parents and often from other teachers, and that's where they're going to need to take some ownership for their own behaviour, is about stuff that they're not doing, that they're doing wrong, they could be doing better. And so they're not feeling emotionally really nourished in that context. Okay, so, if you're a very critical person, and sometimes we're doing that not only to our partners, but we're doing it to ourselves equally, pull up stumps. You need to change that. The second one is about contempt or disrespect. And this one is particularly important to, for us as men, is because sometimes, whether we are aware of it or not, we are not particularly respectful to our female partners. Now, I'm not talking about all the time, although there are some men who are like that all the time. But we need to find a place in where I can respect my partner for who she is, not necessarily for what she does. That's a slightly separate issue. But just on a person-to-person basis, I will respect myself and I will respect her in the process. And the question that comes up here is, how does that connect to the values? Well, again, if you think about what love and respect looks like in action, i.e. concretely, then you need to be able to apply that. So, edit contempt and enter respect, and being caring and loving, being compassionate. The third one is about being defensive. And so, this one usually emerges when my partner says to me, honey, I need to talk to you. And she starts off with something and I immediately bite back. And sometimes I don't let her finish. That's the signal to me that I'm being defensive. All right? So the important aspect there is to allow yourself to be vulnerable. It's become a buzzword, in psychology and in therapy, and especially in men looking at shedding, traditional masculine stereotypes, is that capacity to allow myself to be vulnerable. Essentially what it means is being authentic and open whilst maintaining a position of love and respect, and working with my partner on resolving what the issue is. Now, the fourth one is stonewalling. And this one's very tempting if we feel like we're being attacked, which may or may not be the case, and we go, I don't want to deal with this. And we don't. We walk away, or we just sit there. We might have a frown on our face, but we're not engaging in a dialogue wherein there's love and respect and cooperation. Stonewalling is basically saying to the other person, I am not going to cooperate with you on this issue. Okay? Very important stuff. Now, the next bit, which is also very, very important, is you need to be clear what you're in conflict over. The tendency for most couples is to end up with a sink of dirty dishes, and no one knows exactly what or where the conflict started off in the first place, and where are we at now, and what's in between. And I think it's very, very important during an argument or a fight to, one, stay emotionally as calm as possible. And if you need to take time out, please do so. We do it in sport, so we might as well do it in our marriage or in our relationship. And then regroup. The more emotional we get, the more combative a fight becomes, the more destructive it becomes. So it's a really important factor. So again, it's this clarity that we need to develop on all levels, on the value level, on the communication level, but also the clarity about what it is that we're in conflict over. Are we clear about that? I get parents often getting completely sidetracked because, let's face it, none of us are exactly on the same page in our parenting skills as our partner. There's always going to be some discrepancy. The game of good cop, bad cop gets played out. And then we have a go at each other for not backing each other and or being on a completely different page. If it's that important, deal with your child after you've come up with a clear strategy about how to deal with that child and about the behaviour that you had a problem with, or with whatever they did. Really, really important. So I want you to reflect on this. Now, part of the other element that's going to be relevant to this and actually really getting to be a super ninja with respect to conflict is the capacity to understand your attachment style. Okay, and again, one of the things that I've spoken about in regard to attachment is that not everyone feels securely attached. Many of us have very different attachment styles. And so let me really just run over that very quickly. So, there's the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. There's the avoidant, dismissive attachment style. There's being disorganized and fearful and avoidant attachment style. The aim is to get to feel securely attached. Okay? Now, in order to do that, first of all, we need to feel secure in ourselves. So I might need to do some work on that. But ultimately, that aspect is going to be also very, very important. And we'll unpack that some more over the next, episodes in regard to, okay, had some turning points. Now we're going to look at some issues that's going to make us much, much more connected. Because ultimately, what I want to do over the next little while is to help understand how to get better connections. Firstly, with our partners, family, children, friends. And it's that process that will give us a place where we are going to really nurture our well-being, physically and mentally. Okay, hope that's some good stuff for reflection. So until next time, I'm signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at Noirtainment, NOIRTAINMENT.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.